everyone. Welcome to Mount Cuba's virtual public night. I think we're on number 7, maybe, I think 7 or 8. We love that this night we actually have more than we have had since the beginning. So
Good.
it just shows that we're catching on in the virtual world. So that's good.
Virtually.
Our guest speaker is Scott Jackson. Scott is an associate from Mount Cuba. He also is one of our board members. He has given our Christmas Star program for as long as I've been around, and it seems to be one of our most popular programs. He's a professor at Villanova right now, and there are so many more things I could add, but I'm going to go ahead and let Scott do that. But after we get started, if everyone can mute themselves, and as we go through, if you have questions, send it to me in the chat. I will periodically poke in and give Scott a heads up when I have some questions so we don't bombard him while he's trying to give his talk. And then at the end, we'll open it up for anybody else. So without further ado, Scott, I hand it to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kim. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all tonight. I know it's a difficult situation, but be that as may. I am a professor at Villanova. It has nothing to do with astronomy, unfortunately. So I teach chemical engineering, a science that's very closely related to astronomy. Don't ask me how, but it is. All right. So so I'm going to be the talking head that's up in the corner of your screen for the next probably 30 or 40 minutes, something like that. And if you get tired, you can always just leave and I'll never know the difference. And so that's okay, you know? So, so the first picture here, we're talking about the Christmas star. I do want to give a little bit of a background related to astronomy. I've been involved in astronomy ever since, I think I was 10 years old or something like that. I remember getting these books called Things of Science. And the books would have these blank spots where you're supposed to paste in these pictures. And one picture I remember very distinctly is about astronomy. There's this picture of people that had built their own telescopes, and it was at Stellafane up in Vermont. And here was all these amateur astronomers, and I was hooked. I mean, I saw that, and I said, I got to build my own telescope. And this is 10 years old, right? So by the time I was in 8th grade, I had built my own telescope with a lot of help from my dad and a couple books. There was no astronomy clubs around there, but I had something that you don't have in the Wilmington area. I had dark skies. Now I see Aaron, my son, is on the meeting here, and he lives in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and they have dark skies. Oh my gosh. So it is such a joy to go to a location that has dark skies, go out, and in the summer you see the Milky Way. It's so easy to see. It is so cool. If you ever get to a truly dark sky site and you think you know all the constellations, and you look up and you'll realize there's way too many stars. You can't recognize some of the constellations anymore because there's too many stars. So in any case, so I got the bug because really I lived in a dark sky site out in far western New York State. And, 18 inches of snow, that's nothing to them. Forget it, So, so I remember going, applying to colleges. My dad, who was a chemical engineer, asked me, what are you going to be? What do you want to go into college for? I said, well, what do you think? He says, well, you can't make any money as an astronomer. I said, okay, Dad. I said, I'll go into engineering. How about that? Okay. So I went into chemical engineering, graduated as a chemical engineer. He was very proud of me, so that's fine. Then I can tell you, did support myself and my family over the years, and it's been a great career, to say the least. So I feel very fortunate to be able to work at Villanova and share my experience as a practicing chemical engineer for all upcoming chemical engineers up at Villanova. Has nothing to do with astronomy, but I do manage to inject some astronomy into my courses every once in a while. So the picture you see in the background in this first slide is in fact something called the Crab Nebula. It was a star that exploded as a Type 2, what's called a Type 2 supernova back in 1054 AD. And we know this because it was observed by the Chinese and by several other cultures and we knew the approximate location. And in modern times, this was one of the first objects that a guy by the name of Charles Messier came across when he's looking for comets. And it didn't move, and he says, "Oh, I got a catalog, so I'm not going to fool around and realize that this is something other than a comet." So it's a really cool object, and why it's on here is because a supernova has been suggested as the thing that caused the Christmas star. And as you'll see in my discussion, it probably wasn't a supernova. But that's sort of getting ahead of myself. So if this works, come on, there we go. So we'll talk about the basis for the star. So we're going to actually read what little there is in the Bible that talks about the star, okay? And then I'll list out a bunch of possible explanations. As a matter of fact, I had a meeting today where we talked about the Christmas star, and some of these things were asked to me about. Actually, this is a faculty meeting at Villanova, and we'll talk about some of the key events, because those key events help bracket the time frames that you're going to be looking at. But my favorite, and I think it's a favorite that's offered, it's actually offered by a priest from Notre Dame, is basically a triple conjunction followed by what's called a close conjunction. It's like, oh no, what does conjunction mean? So unfortunately, you're going to learn a little bit of astronomy and what conjunction means. Okay, and let me preface this that in the last the kinds of things I'll talk about, we did not appreciate up until about maybe 15 or 20 years ago, because we didn't have the models that described the solar system to such an accuracy that we have now. So there's actually a program that I run on my laptop. It's the same program that we run on our digital planetarium. It's called, we use that, and it's very accurate out to about 15,000 years in the future and 15,000 years in the past. And these simulations I'll show are just remarkable. And in fact, I'm going to show you the simulation of what's happening right now, which is also a very close conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. It's really, really cool. So all I can say is, if you can get a chance, it's clear out. It won't be for the next few days. Go out, look towards the southwest. You have to have a clear horizon. And you'll see a really bright star out there about 30 minutes after the sun sets. And that bright star is Jupiter. And just up to the upper left, not too far from it, there's another dimmer star. That's Saturn. Jupiter, over the next course of a couple days, and I'll have a simulation in here, will actually pass by Saturn very closely. So if you have a reasonable telescope, you'll actually see them in the same field of view. It's pretty neat. It doesn't happen too often that they are that close. So we'll talk about what a conjunction is, right? And there's a lot to do about ancient meetings, because when I'll call them astronomers, they were really astrologers, looked up in the sky, they saw certain things happening, they interpreted those things to mean something. Now, you open up magazines or newspapers now, and you look at the astrology section, and people swear by these things, but they're written so vaguely that you could almost interpret anything you want. But really, modern astronomy came from astrologers. And in fact, the first really renowned astronomers, including Kepler and Galileo, were astrologers. That is, they used the movement of stars and planets to try to predict the future. But again, they were very careful in making it very vague. Okay, so we'll call it the Christmas conjunction. Okay, so again, there's a supernova remnant. It's called the Crab Nebula, Messier number 1. All right, so the basis for the star. So it's amazing. There's only 2 sentences in the whole New Testament that talks about the star. It's in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. Okay, it's not mentioned anywhere else. It's not mentioned by any other author in the New Testament. It's like, oh wow, it must have been a really big event. But be that as it may, okay, the reality of the situation. It was not really written down for at least 70 years after Christ was born. So it was an oral story up until 70 AD, and at that point, that's when Matthew wrote his part of the Bible, and that's when it became part of history. The biblical account was written some 300 years later, and there are some inconsistencies certainly in the King James Version. So obviously the King James Version of the Bible was written, or was a translation of older texts that were in Greek and Latin, and there could be some inaccuracies in there, but let's keep on going. So we're going to tell you what's in the Bible, okay? So here it is, quote, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born the King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. Then Herod inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem. When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother." Okay, so I highlighted from the east, in the east, saw in the east. So okay, everything's in the east, right? Not in the west. All right. Let's take, you'll see a map here very shortly. So if the wise men came from the east, then why was the star in the east and not the west? Okay, and you will see a picture here. I gotta make certain I know what I'm looking at. Yeah, so in the next slide, you're gonna see a map that shows what the likely travel point of the wise guys, our wise men are, okay? So the wise men had to travel south to Bethlehem from Jerusalem, where Herod lived. And that's a key thing. And when they got to, so let's ignore some of these inconsistencies for now. So here's the picture. And if I'm good about this, let's see. I'm going to annotate. I'm going to draw. So in all likelihood, the wise men came from this area around Babylon, okay? So the belief is they probably took the trade routes, this red dotted line, and then came down here to Damascus, and then finally went to Jerusalem. And by the way, this is where they talked to King Herod, and then they had a couple more miles before to the south to get to Bethlehem. It's like, okay, so east is over here, west is over here, and I don't like the color of my annotation because you probably can't see it. Let's see if I can't change my annotation. Let's go to white. Okay, so again, east is over here, west is that way, and they traveled up from Babylon, talked to King Herod, and then traveled south a short distance to Bethlehem. Okay, pretty wild. So having the star over in the east didn't help them because they're coming. It doesn't make any sense. Be that as it may. All right, come on. I always have this trouble. So, by the way, this is a microwave background. So it has nothing to do with the Christmas star, but it's a pretty picture again. Okay.
Hey, Scott, I'm sorry to interrupt. There was a question.
Okay.
Did they see the star from the east or in the east?
Well, that's a good question. It says in the east, right? For we have seen his star in the east. But they're traveling towards the west, right? So, okay. So you'll see that the star probably was, in fact, in the west, if we understand what's going on. So be that as it may, maybe, and then they saw it, which they saw in the east again. It's like, I don't know. Don't ask me. I don't. So there may be some inconsistency here, but be that as it may, don't hang on every word in the Bible, okay? So because it's a translation, obviously. Okay, so the Christmas star was meant to signify birth. So if you're looking for some sort of symbolism, associated with birth should happen with the event that is what we call the Christmas star. Okay, it has to represent kingship because clearly the wise men believed that the king had been born. So birth and kingship. Okay, so again, you're looking for things that would represent kings or birth, right? And it has to be related to the Jewish nation. Okay, so okay, this is getting, and it rose in the east, and that's probably right, and you'll see a simulation, but ultimately at the end it was actually in the west when the final thing that I'll describe happened. Okay, and King Herod had been aware of it in some ways. Okay, which means King Herod was alive. Okay, it did appear or start at an exact time, and it did endure over time because it actually took a while for these guys to travel. So it couldn't have been something that happened for just a day. It couldn't have been something that happened for probably, had to be much more than a month. As you'll see, the thing that I'm talking about is actually endured for about 9 months. Interesting, okay? It was in front of the Magi when they traveled south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and then it stopped over Bethlehem. Now that's interesting, and you'll see when I do the simulation what that might mean. Okay, so here's the possible explanations. This is everything that everybody's ever talked about. It could be a comet. Okay, and so that could have some duration, but not a really long duration. A comet will appear, will be very bright for a few weeks, maybe a month. But in ancient times, certainly comets, because they looked like fiery balls, were usually harbingers of doom. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here. Supernova. Start off with talking about M1, the Crab Nebula. And because particularly the Chinese were really good at observing them and stating the time, so we have a fairly solid record of supernova occurring for the last 2,000 years or 3,000 years. We don't know of any supernova that would have been exciting to watch that had occurred at that point in time. A supernova will endure to some extent. It gets very bright. There's actually a light curve. And let me draw this. So if you draw a light curve, this is time, and this is the amount of light you might see. It spikes up very quickly, and then it comes down. And for a typical type 2 supernova, it plateaus out, and then it goes down exponentially. And this plateau area can last maybe on the order of maybe a month or something like that. So it can endure to a certain extent, but this really, really bright part where you might see it during the day, and that's exactly what happened in 1054 for the Crab Nebula. It was an object you could very easily see during the day, but that will only last for a very short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 days, and then it decays down, and then this has this afterglow from radioactive material that's decaying. But again, we aren't aware of a supernova in that time frame. Okay. All right, let's come on. There we go. Occultation or eclipse. It's not a star. It's very transient, and certainly an occultation or eclipse, and we'll talk about them in more detail, doesn't endure for a long period of time. Okay. And then conjunction. Conjunction is sort of what I'm focusing on in this talk. Okay, and you'll see why. And then of course there's a catch-all, and we all have to accept this as a matter of faith that okay, the Star of Bethlehem could have been real, and in some sense, as part of our faith, we really don't need to necessarily have an explanation for it. It just happened. Okay, and that's okay, All right. So what are the key events? So we know King Herod was alive, that he died shortly after the birth of Christ. So I'm not certain what shortly means, but it probably means within about a year. So Herod died after lunar eclipse. There's the thing. So a lunar eclipse, we can simulate very accurately with this planetarium software. And we know that Passover followed Herod's death, which means that the lunar eclipse had to happen early in a year. And the fact of the matter is, despite the fact that we start our calendars at 0 AD, essentially on January 1st, 2020 years ago, we know very much that Christ was not born at that date, okay? In all likelihood, most historians believe Christ was born probably at 2 BC, maybe 4 BC, something like that, a number of years earlier than when our actual calendar starts, okay? It is what it is, okay? All right, so what's an eclipse? So here's an example of a lunar eclipse. It can be a very exciting phenomenon. And in fact, what's interesting is that the Greeks had observed many lunar eclipses. And from the lunar eclipse, they were able to estimate the size of the Earth. I mean, they knew the size of the Earth already from something else, but they were able to deduce the size of the moon, which is pretty cool. So there's 2 lunar eclipses that happen. One is on 4 BC, and one is January 9th through 10th, 1 BC. This looks really interesting because that would be before Passover, and it would be consistent somewhat. This 4 BC looks a little too early, but okay, it's probably close, okay? Okay. So a lunar eclipse on 4 BC was correct, then Christ must have been born on or before 5 BC. And that, based on everything, what little we know, is probably too early for Christ's birth, okay? The lunar eclipse on 1 BC seems more appropriate. So that means Christ was born on or before 2 BC, but not as early as 4 BC. And consequently, Passover would have occurred just a month or 2 after the eclipse, as history indicates. So everything's consistent with the 1 BC time frame. So we focus on that. So that sounds like a pretty good. So now we've got a sort of a time frame to look at for trying to understand what might have happened. Okay. And of course, I have to erase this all my things. So here's, of course, I like to put in the planetarium software we can actually pull movies out of, and this is an example of a movie. So this is actually the moon, and you'll see that it's sped up very rapidly, and you'll see that the moon gets dark. This is actually the eclipse that would have happened in 1 BC. So I changed the settings for location. I went to Bethlehem. I went to 1 BC on that date, the January date, and I simulated and I caught a picture. So it's like I just transported you to Bethlehem of Judea, and we're up there looking at, and we changed the time, and we're up there looking at the moon. And by the way, there's no clouds, okay? And so let's go ahead and see what happens, okay? So again, this is very fast, okay? The moon does move against the stars, and there it goes in a total eclipse. It's a very deep eclipse, by the way. And then there it comes out again, okay? And so that's not a bad simulation what really happens. So anybody has actually seen a lunar eclipse, we realize, yeah. So when a lunar eclipse happens, it's not absolutely black because the Earth has a lot of atmospheres, and light coming from behind it, from the sun, actually refracts around the Earth's atmosphere, and it causes the moon to look red. Very, very typically. And in fact, from lunar eclipse to lunar eclipse, you can actually see different colors. It's pretty cool depending on the atmospheric conditions here on Earth. Okay, so yeah, I'm not certain why I had to show this to you again, but be that as may, that's probably part of the thing. So just for a rerun here. There we go. That's coming out. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, so let's go back to the explanations. So a comet, harbinger of doom, supernova, occultation, eclipse. We did just talk about one kind of eclipse. We'll talk about, and then conjunction, okay? And then, of course, no plausible explanation. Let's talk about comets, okay? I can't remember what this picture is. This might be a picture of Comet West. I'm not certain. But certainly when quite a few years ago, 1985, 1986, I can't remember when it was. But there was 2 comets that were back to back that were spectacular. Comet Hale-Bopp which was a fairly small object, but it was way on the other side of the, well, because it was on the other side of the solar system, but it was very bright. I remember driving down I-95 and the light pollution you wouldn't believe, and I looked up and I said, oh, there's Comet Hale-Bopp. You don't get an opportunity to see that bright a comet very often, but it was very compact, very small. Comet, oh, I'm going to butcher the name here, Hayatoki or something like that, was also, I think, a year before that, a year after that. That was a spectacular comet, but it's much more diffuse, much closer to us, and you had to go to a dark sky to really see the extent of the tail. Very spectacular, to say the least. But again, back in ancient times, people had no understanding of what they were, and they looked very ominous, right? They looked like basically a fireball streaking across the sky, although it took, you know, a while for it to move. So I would be surprised that people would have thought, that wise men would have thought that a comet would have been indicating the birth of a king for the Jewish nation. Okay, it has to have those three things. I don't see how a comet could do that. Maybe it could, who knows? So the dirty snowballs, just for getting some astronomy comes in here. It comes from the part of the solar system called the Kuiper Belt or the Oort cloud. Long period comets from the Oort cloud. Kuiper Belt objects tend to be shorter period comets. Only Halley's comet is coming from the Kuiper Belt. Okay, and basically they sit out there, and gravity may, if there's a certain alignment of planets, could just perturb them in, and they start falling towards the sun, and they go around the sun, go back out to where they came from. Okay, and the sun's radiation pressure and also solar wind causes two kinds of tails. It's sort of cool, and you'll see those two kinds of tails. As a matter of fact, on this image you see here, there's two kinds of tails. There's this ionized tail, and that's caused by the solar wind, and then this stuff is actually being evaporated off the comet, and then this stuff is what really makes meteor showers. That leaves a trail of debris behind the comet, and every once in a while, when the Earth travels into this trail of debris, we see meteor showers. Okay, pretty cool. But that has nothing to do with the Star of Bethlehem. Okay, let's get this. There we go. Again, they're harbingers of doom. It's not the birth of a great king for the Jewish people. Okay, supernova. Talked about this. This is actually an artist's illustration of what a supernova might look like. Who knows? I'm certain that whoever painted this got big bucks to do this. So this is not a real picture, right? But it looks cool, pretty cool. It's a spectacular event, no question whatsoever. Matter of fact, during the summer, Betelgeuse had actually dimmed in brightness. So that's a star in the right shoulder of Orion. As a matter of fact, Orion is rising right now. As a matter of fact, if you go out about 10 o'clock tonight, you'll see it towards the southeast. And it's a red giant star. We know that Betelgeuse is at the end of its lifetime. It will go supernova in a short period of time, but that's in a geological time frame. It may go next year, it may go in 50,000 years. So I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for it to happen. But it can be a very spectacular event, no question whatsoever. Very noticeable by people who bother looking at the sky, and certainly the Chinese were very good at that. Okay, and it's recorded by many ancient cultures, both in the Americas as well as in Eurasia, and they saw nothing. That's the bottom line. That there's none recorded by any cultures around the birth of Christ. If it had happened, we'd think that it would be in the historical record, and there's nothing in there. Okay. Eclipses. So the top picture was the solar eclipse back on August of 2017. The bottom one is actually a picture of I think partial or a lunar eclipse. So the solar is above and then the lunar below. It's no question. The eclipses are spectacular, but they're very transient. That is, they're very short-lived. Again, one of the criteria we're looking for, it has to endure, okay? And an eclipse just won't endure for the time that the wise men traveled across what would be Iraq and then Syria, okay? The other thing that happens is an occultation. So that's, well, actually the bottom picture here is in fact an occultation. An occultation is where an object, in this case the moon, goes in front of another star, and so in a sense it's like an eclipse, but it's assigned to a star. You can also get an occultation of a planet behind another object, or two planets going behind the other. But again, it's very transient. It's very short-lived. It is pretty spectacular. Don't get me wrong. So if you have a bright star being going behind the moon, you'll notice it. As a matter of fact, the amateur astronomers will set up their telescopes to take a look at it. What's really cool is to do a grazing occultation, that a star will go right along the limb there, and you can actually see. You can back out if you have a lot of people taking data, observing this. You can actually back out what the moons look like on the moon. Sort of cool. Let's clear this. But occultations are not necessarily spectacular, and again, they don't necessarily carry meaning. Okay, so let's look at the possibilities again. A triple conjunction between Jupiter and Regulus, and that occurs from September 3rd BC to June 2nd BC. So all of a sudden you realize, oh, that's a long time. So there's a good long period of duration. It happens in Leo, okay? This all is very, very important, okay? And then it's followed thereupon by a conjunction of Venus and Jupiter. Now conjunction of itself, and we'll talk about a conjunction, but basically it's basically two objects going by each other. It was very spectacular, and you'll see that. And that happens on June 17th and 2 BC in Leo, okay? So this is about the right time, all right? So there's also what's called a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, and that happens from April to December in 7 BC. What a triple conjunction means is that, let me draw this, is that Saturn will be sitting here, Jupiter will come by, and that will be the first. For a conjunction is that two objects, let's say Jupiter and Saturn in this case, they go by each other, and that's when they are at the closest approach. So you got to think about the raceway up in the sky. It's called the ecliptic. It's the plane of our solar system. So everybody's going around this raceway, and because of our perception, they appear to pass each other on this raceway. Okay, and that's happening right now in the Southwest. You'll see that. So Jupiter would be going this way, but if the conjunction happens, there's something called, oh no, here's another term, opposition. Then Jupiter will actually appear to reverse its direction and then go forward again. So planets always want to go in one direction, and that's the prograde motion. But when they're in opposition, they actually go in reverse direction. That's called retrograde. And so this triple conjunction was basically Jupiter going through opposition. By the way, Saturn was close to opposition as well. It had to be. And so it went by, and then it went by again. So it actually had three conjunctions where in this case, Jupiter and Saturn went very close to each other and passed by each other. So that would be pretty cool. Don't get me wrong. And it too actually does endure for a fairly long period of time. But the issue is that it's not spectacular. And in fact, the other problem is it happens in 7 BC, and that's not consistent with a lunar eclipse and Herod's death. Okay, so something's not right there, right? So this first one is the triple conjunction, is really what I'm going to focus on. Okay, whoop, did I miss something? Yeah, an occultation of Jupiter on moons in Aries. Okay, and again, these two dates seem a little bit too early. And again, an occultation, it'd be pretty cool for the moon to go across Jupiter. Amateur astronomers throughout the world be really cool. Oh yeah, we got to go out and see moon go in front of Jupiter. But guess what? It's very transient. Most lay people, well, okay, that's pretty cool. Maybe the wise men would have thought that would be pretty cool, but it doesn't last for a month. It lasts for one night, and that's it. You're done, guys. Right? Okay, Christmas conjunction. So what's a conjunction? It is the close apparent alignment, or approach of two planets or a planet and a star. Okay, In this case, we're going to talk about Jupiter and Venus. Jupiter and Venus are the two brightest star-like objects in the sky, okay? So they're as bright as anything other than the moon and the sun. So here's the two brightest objects out there that are coming together, and it would have been interesting, to say the least. So there was an example of it back in October 1991, and I believe I have a simulation here shortly. And that was Jupiter and Venus in the morning sky in Leo, interestingly enough, okay? So here it is. And this doesn't have simulations, but I think in another one I do have a simulation. But here's Leo, the lion, sort of cool. And so this is the sickle, Regulus, which is, get this, the king star, okay? And Leo does tend to represent kingliness, all right? And they came fairly close together, but you can see there's a gap there, right? So for us, all right, for us amateur astronomers, that's pretty cool. Jupiter and Venus are close together. But for the ancients, they probably thought that was pretty cool. But the conjunction that we're going to talk about is in a class all by itself. It is pretty amazing, all right? So why do conjunction occur? I tried to talk through it a couple slides ago, but the planets reside on the plane of our solar system. They're not exactly all in exactly the same plane, so they're actually off a little bit, maybe by half a degree or so, something like that. But that plane is called the ecliptic. When we project that plane up into the sky, it becomes a line, okay? And that line goes through, guess what? The signs of the zodiac. That's why the signs of the zodiac are so important to astrologers, because all the objects in our solar system travel along that line and they go through those signs. And you try to interpret the meaning of the future, because you can sort of predict where they're going to be and say, oh, well, the sun's in Aries. That means you're going to be a really pain in the butt brother-in-law or something like that, you know? I don't think they can get that detailed, but be that as may. So the planets go around the same direction. It's called generally prograde motion as we appear. So that goes from west to east, right? And they pass by stars, so that would mean an opposition with the star, and they appear to go at different speeds. So Venus takes a 6/10 of a year to go around the sun. The Earth takes 1 year. Thank God, I'm right about that, 365.25 days. Mars is 1.9 years, Jupiter 11.9, and Saturn 29.5 years. From our perspective, the closer you're in, the quicker they travel. So Jupiter would appear to go across the sky at more than twice the speed of which Saturn goes across. And that's simply because it's closer to us, and in fact, it does travel faster too. So they appear in opposition when they pass each other on that ecliptic road. Now, you can think of it as I-95. Now, the key thing is that because each of these planets are at slightly different planes, they're all on the ecliptic, but they're slightly off a little bit. When they pass by each other, sometimes they can be fairly far apart. It's not all that interesting. Oh, they're in opposition. Oh, or they're in conjunction. No big deal. Sometimes they get really close together. And you'll see the conjunction I'm going to talk about was phenomenally close, really close. Pretty cool. Okay, so this is meant so I've jumped off, and this is again coming out of our planetarium. We've jumped off the Earth, and we're looking back at the sun, and here we're sitting on the Earth, right here. And here's Venus, and here's Jupiter. And as we look out to Venus, again, we're looking away from the sun. If we're on the backside of the Earth, you can still see this. And the sun is set already, and you'll see Venus, what appears to be really close to Jupiter. Although they're very far away, they appear in the sky to be very close together. Now, there was something I think it was in the 1970s. It's called the Jupiter effect. It was a big book, made the author a lot of money, and he must have known that he was just, well, be that as may. So there was going to be a close conjunction of all the planets. And it's like, oh, all the planets are lined up. And so that's going to give us extra gravity. And it's going to tear apart the Earth. And it's going to be the end of the world. That alignment of planets did, in fact, happen. But the Earth did not end. It didn't get torn apart. Yeah, okay, maybe the planets were sort of lined up, but you know, that doesn't mean anything. Yes, there could have been a little bit extra boost, maybe a nanogram extra force on the Earth. Woo, whoop-dee. Had nothing to do with it. But the author of that book did make a lot of money. So perhaps I'm a little jealous. I sure wrote that book, and I wouldn't have to do lectures anymore. Who knows? Good question. What's going on? All right. So I'm back to this again. So the current, there's that conjunction again, and I could have sworn that I had, I guess I don't. So there is the current conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. So here is Jupiter down here. And what's cool, this is the actual Jupiter. These guys right here are the moons of Jupiter. Io, Europa, Callisto, and Ganymede. And then here's Saturn right here. And these little white dots are actually its moons. So, and you can, in a 10-inch telescope, I have a 10-inch telescope, you can look at Saturn, you can see these moons, you can identify them. Titan is also in there someplace too. So that's pretty cool, okay? And so right now, actually, I think this starts at tomorrow night. This starts at tomorrow night. They're actually pretty close, but you'll see as I run this movie, this is like 6,000 times real time, okay? You can actually see the moons of Jupiter going around each other. Pretty cool. And by the way, when you look up in the sky, there won't be any labels, okay? That's the bad thing about using a telescope. You never see any labels up in the sky. That's supposed to be a joke. You're supposed to be laughing, by the way. So at some point in time here, around the 20th.
But they're muted.
I know. So around here, someplace, it's the 20th and 21st. I think the simulation goes out to the 22nd. And you can see there's Saturn, and they're at opposition right about now. So if I stop this simulation, so there's a very specific, when the closest approach is right here, they're in opposition. Or I'm sorry, they're in conjunction. So it happens pretty quickly, but there is in this case there's an approach, and with any conjunction, you generally have a prediction. It's coming all up, and boy, they're going to get close together, and they get really close together, and they move out. In our case, for this conjunction that's happening right now, and it's going to happen through basically you'll be able to see them pretty close through Christmas. You'll be able to see the separate planets. They're going to get really close together by your naked eye, okay? In a telescope, it'll be really spectacular to look at, be able to see Jupiter and Saturn right next to each other. Really cool. I mean, this is great stuff for nerds who are amateur astronomers, just like myself, okay? And let's erase that stuff, get all my, and then Jupiter goes by, and that's about it. Interesting thing about Jupiter, you can see the moons actually move around in a very regular pattern, and in fact, that was a way to measure time back in the 18th century, believe it or not, before they had good watches, and but it means you had to be able to see Jupiter in order to do that. As a matter of fact, the first measurement of the speed of light was because of the movement of Jupiter's moons. Okay, so are they unique events, conjunctions? No, they're not unique events. A conjunction with a star about every time a planet goes around the sun. So Jupiter once every 12 years at least. But there's many stars, so it could happen quite a few times. It happens with other planets more often. Between Venus and Jupiter, about 9 to 10 months. Most conjunctions are not necessarily very close. The last part of this Christmas conjunction, I'll call it the Christmas star, between Venus and Jupiter was extremely close. It's probably one of the closest that we know of, okay? And that's the Orion Nebula. What's in the background now is in what's called the Rosette Nebula. So the planet and the star in the conjunction must have meaning. The planets that are in conjunction must have meaning. The constellation in which the conjunction occurs must have meaning. So I sort of alluded to this when I showed you the conjunction back in, I think it was 1991, between Jupiter and Venus in the constellation of Leo, fairly close to Regulus, the king star. Regal, Regulus, sort of cool. Well, that has a lot of bearing as to what, okay. And let me, for some reason, stop. Let's clear the drawings. So ancient meanings were very relative. So Jupiter means kingly. Regulus is in fact a king star. Mars is considered to rule over Judea. Venus means peace and harmony. Leo the lion, it's an ancient Jewish symbol. So all of a sudden, if you have Jupiter and Venus and Regulus and Leo the lion, all of a sudden you have a king. Not clear that's being born, but you have a king who's going to be of Jewish, who's going to bring peace and harmony. Interesting. And then Aries the ram, it also represents Judea. So again, what I'm inferring here is that our players here will be Jupiter, Regulus, Venus, and Leo the lion. And all of a sudden you have the Jewish state in there. You have a king, both Jupiter and Regulus being king, and then Venus, in this case, bringing peace and harmony. Okay, interesting. All right, there's nothing here necessarily about birth, but you'll see that it could be interpreted in birth in a different way. So Jupiter and Regulus in Leo, Jupiter and Leo, Venus in Leo, and Jupiter and Mars in Leo. So Jupiter and Venus in Leo is what we're most interested in. So triple conjunction between Jupiter and Regulus. So that means Jupiter goes by Regulus 3 times, the king star, okay? And then that's from September 3rd BC to June 2nd BC. And that's followed by a conjunction of Venus and Jupiter. And that happens on June 17th, 2 BC in Leo, okay? And that's all about the right time. And then there's the triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, which I mentioned before. That's too early, and then occultation. And we don't, those last two, forget it, yeah. This one is the one that most modern theologians, including the guy, I can't remember his name, from Notre Dame, has pointed out could be construed as the Christmas star, okay? And let's keep on going here. And I truly believe that this is probably, if there's going to be a Christmas star, an explanation for it, it's probably this one, okay? So in 3 BC in August, Venus and Jupiter are in a conjunction near Regulus. It's not remarkable, but as time progresses, Jupiter does something very unusual, okay? And you'll see this in the simulation. It loops around above Regulus, passing by it 3 times. There's the triple conjunction, okay, of Jupiter with Regulus. When it goes around above Regulus, it looks like it's crowning Regulus. Whoa, isn't that cool? And you'll see that in the simulation. So here it is, August 11th, 3 BC, and by the way, we're in Judea, okay? And here's Venus and Jupiter. They're in conjunction, by the way, but Venus pretty quickly leaves the field of view, okay? And we're looking east, so it's actually in the evening here, okay? And here it is. So I'm going to let time go by very quickly, and you'll see something happen that's pretty cool. So Venus actually leaves the field of view very quickly because obviously but I've also turned on the marker as to what's happening with Jupiter, okay? And it goes back. So it was prograde motion, now it's retrograde motion, and it stops, and it becomes prograde again. And here comes Venus back again. So I think if I let it run out here, I'm gonna do some markups. So here's Regulus, the king star, and if you notice, Jupiter seems to make a loop, a circle around Regulus, like as if he's crowning him, okay? And by the way, it takes 9 months for this to happen. I wonder what the gestation period for a little baby is. 9 months. Pretty cool. Wonder if that has anything to do with anything. Come on. Come on. Come on. There we go. So the reality is that the way I configured that is I kept Leo in the same spot. So in reality, what you'd see is if you went out early in the evening, you'd actually see Leo move across the sky. Is this going to work? It's going to go across that way, and I didn't want to do that. So come on. So if we do this, am I going? I'm not going the right way. Come on, let's go this way. Come on, there we go. I knew there was embedded. So actually, if you stood out and looked at 7 o'clock every night and kept on going out exactly the same time, you'd actually see Leo go from the east over to the west, and this happened, okay? So again, the crowning kind of thing. So early evening. So that's not to say that that's what the wise men did say, but if they were going out in the evening, they'd actually see it go across the sky like that. So Jupiter crowns Regulus. Venus comes back into view about 9 months later. Interesting. Venus has a spectacularly close conjunction with Jupiter. I keep on saying that, and you'll see what I mean. And Venus and Jupiter merge. In fact, when they go through that conjunction, they get so close that you would have needed a telescope to see them be separated. And I can tell you, if that were to happen these days, considering how, well, whatever, people would have freaked out now, okay? Back then, they probably freaked out because all of a sudden it looked like somehow Venus and Jupiter were gobbling up each other. Happened effectively only one night, maybe 2 nights. But shortly after that, all of a sudden, boom, the two would have separated. And in a sense, that's like birthing the star again, okay? It's like the reemergence of Jupiter from Venus would have looked like, in a sense, a birth. That's certainly our modern interpretation. What isn't subject to interpretation, you would have needed a telescope to actually see the 2 planets, because with your naked eye, you would not be able to separate them. They would have looked like one star, okay? But the pretty cool thing is, with our modern technology, we can simulate all this. And 20 years ago, 15 years ago, you could not have done this, okay? So here's June 16th. The wise men would have been able to see 2 planets, but not on the 17th of June on 2 BC. And you can see the dates up here, all right? And let me see, this is not the thing, but this is the movie. So obviously these are the mountains of Judea, which aren't. So these are mountains. This happens to be a horizon out in the western part of the United States. It looks pretty, but be that as it may, I'm pretty certain they don't have mountains this tall. I've never been there, but who knows? Maybe they do. I don't know. So I zoom in, and I let time go forward, and there you can see that you can actually see the moons of Jupiter there. And I'm not certain what happened there, but be that as it may. So Venus goes right by Jupiter, and I think that's it. Okay, so let's keep on going. So here's a zoom in. So here I've gone using our planetarium as a virtual telescope. At this point, for a visual observer using their own unaided eye, they would only see one object. They were so close. And by the way, the simulation doesn't really do justice. This Venus here is actually brighter than Jupiter. Jupiter's right here. And because this reflects so much light, it's just this brilliantly white crescent figure here. And it would have been brighter than Jupiter. And again, these are the moons of Jupiter sitting here. Of course, nobody would be able to see the moons of Jupiter. This is a star outside of the field of view, not relevant for what we're talking about. But this shows you, come on, that they almost touch. Isn't that crazy? That's so cool. And again, if this were to happen in modern times, people would just freak out. There would be doomsdayers. They say, oh, the end of the world's happening. Oh my gosh, we're all going to die. Of course, that isn't what happened back then. That would have been pretty neat to see, to say the least. Okay, let's stop this. I just want to go on. So it merged into one very bright object in June 17, and this is a view through a telescope. Okay, and again, the telescope was not invented, and this is not a deep state theory or anything else like that. Okay, so Jupiter starts to crown Regulus 9 months before a dramatically close conjunction or merger of Venus and Jupiter. And the concept is, so 9 months, the start of the 9 months is like conception. Jupiter crowns Regulus. It's a king. Regulus is a king star. Jupiter's a king star. Happens in Leo. My gosh. And so it infers birth for the Jewish nation, bringing a king, and in this case, peace and harmony for Venus, right? Whoa, that's pretty cool, right? I mean, you can't get, I don't know, I don't think you can get much better than that. So the fact of the matter is, you saw what I had to say at the beginning. It's just those 2 sentences in the King James Version. And there was some inconsistency about, you know, the star to the east and the west, and not the west, blah, blah, blah. But this Christmas conjunction is probably the best of anything that I can imagine. Even if I call them dramatic events, and certainly we would call them dramatic events in our time. Even if those aren't the Christmas star, in some sense, it shouldn't impact our faith. Okay, our faith should not depend on whether we can explain something, because ultimately faith is not that. Faith is really to believe in something you don't have to have any concrete evidence for. Okay, so now I'm sound like I'm a preacher up here, but you know, the myth could just be a symbol of Christ's birth and a sign of Christian faith. The fact of the matter is, I truly believe that this Christmas conjunction was, in fact, the Star of Bethlehem. There's just so much meaning to that. And certainly the wise men, who in all likelihood were very proficient astrologers, i.e. astronomers in a sense, would have recognized the importance of that event and how unique it was. Certainly when Venus and Jupiter disappeared into one object, holy smokes, people would have freaked out, no question whatsoever. So that's about what I have to say. This is the merger.
I did have a few comments that just came through.
Okay.
The one is, oh, hold on, I just lost it. Was a comment. An observation. If the wise men had to explain it to Herod, it could not have been spectacular.
Probably because Herod was not an astronomer or astrologer. True. Okay.
And then the other question we had was, is Venus a goddess of birth and renewal? And also, any thought to the significance of things happening in threes, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost?
Interesting. Well, you know, the Bible is full of representation of numbers, right? So 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles. You know, it's a product of 3 prime numbers. I don't know if they necessarily appreciate it's a product of 2 prime numbers. I'm sorry. But yeah, I'm not going to get into that. Venus being, what was it she said? He said?
Goddess of birth and renewal.
Yeah, I think that's right, isn't it? I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point. Valid point. Yeah. Very good.
And then question, why does Jupiter appear to move in reverse?
That's because, so in that simulation, because Venus is closer to us in a sense. So what I did, well, okay. No, I'm sorry. So when we talked about the triple conjunction of, we're talking about Jupiter, right? Or was it Venus going? Jupiter. So when it goes prograde motion, and then it seems to stop and go retrograde and then prograde again. So that's reversing in direction. It's because the Earth is traveling on I-95 and it's passing Jupiter in the sky in a sense. So here we're sitting in a car on I-95 and we decide to pass the car in front of us. So initially it looks like we're both, from our perspective, sitting in the car, we're both traveling in the same direction, right? That as we pass that car, it looks like that car is going backwards. Isn't that weird? That's what's happening in the sky. We are sitting here on Earth. We're looking up in the sky. Jupiter is going in the same direction we are. But by the way, when we pass Jupiter, it looks like it's going behind us. But then after a while, we look back and we can see that car again, and it's going in the same direction as us. It never went backwards. It's just that we went past it, okay? And that's literally what's happening when Jupiter appears to go in reverse direction. It's simply because us on Earth is actually passing Jupiter in a sense, okay? Does that make sense?
I believe that you got it. Bud would like to ask you if it was possible that it was Rudolph's nose we saw from afar.
Oh, sure. No question. I don't know if Rudolph and Santa Claus was around back then, but who knows? You know, you could have been that.
You don't know.
You don't know.
And then the last question I have here, gentleman says, I believe I read a book called The Star That Astonished the World, that the conjunction also appeared within Virgo. Is that correct? Do you know about that?
There is a second explanation. There was a conjunction in Virgo. What was it? Virgo does show up here because, oh man, you got to test my knowledge here. Virgo is right behind Leo, and when I did the first simulation where you had Jupiter and Venus relatively close together, but Jupiter does its crowning of Regulus. Venus actually goes back and it actually touches Virgo behind Leo for a short time, but that's not super relevant. But there was something about Virgo, and I can't remember what it was. That's part of the story, but I didn't include it in this thing because I really focused just on the crowning of Regulus and that very, very close conjunction.
It also said that they read that Virgo means virgin, so maybe that had some implications.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for the birth of Christ, Mary being a virgin. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, by the way, you talked about Herod. If it wasn't such a spectacular event, why didn't Herod know about it? The fact of the matter is that triple conjunction is the only thing that the wise men would have seen by then. Presumably, the really close conjunction of Venus and Jupiter was probably still a few days away when they met Herod, is my guess. Okay, so that would have been very spectacular. I can't imagine Herod not knowing about that because everybody would have been freaked out, to be honest with you. Okay. Well, I really appreciate everybody, and thank you, Kim and Judy, for putting this together. And I wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, and please stay safe and healthy. You know, it's a strange time. You know, we don't get to be with our grandkids, or we have one grandkid, and we have another one that's on the way. So it is what it is. You make the best of it. But hopefully we'll be through this all in another 6 months. So God bless.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, Scott, we thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I'm getting a lot of pop-ups on my screen thanking you for a wonderful evening and wishing you a happy holiday.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you all later.
Bye-bye. Have a good night, everyone. Have a good